In our last video, we talked about p-flow source, and we looked at some of the very basic things it could do. Well, let's continue with that, but instead of looking at particles, as we were looking at last time, let's look at what's called mParticles, which is kind of like particle flow's version of mass effects, or our collision system. So let's come up to our Create tab, and I'm going to go again to Particle Systems, p-flow source. I'm going to create my icon and open up my particle view. Now what I'm going to do is delete everything, because what I want to do is create mParticles flow. And we'll see a different kind of p-flow source in our event. And if we come in and look in our view, and all I did was middle click and move, we see that now I have like a very basic collision system. What I want to do though is I don't want to have a grid of objects. For what I'm going to show, I want just a regular birth. I'm going to overwrite that birth grid with birth, and we can see that my grid disappears. And from here, what I'm going to do, and I think this is going to be really fun if you want to follow along, is I'm going to come again to my Create tab, my geometry, and I'm going to create, under Standard Primitives, a geosphere. And bring that geosphere in, move it up a little bit, and if I want to create more segments, I can, or less segments, I can. For what we're going to look at, the default is just fine. Make that a nice 15, nice even number. Okay. So then, again, I'm going to go to my particle view, and under birth, I want to have my objects around this geosphere. So again, like our last video, we're going to come to Position Object, bring that in, maybe right under Shape. Sounds good to me. I'm going to choose my geosphere. And my shape, I'm going to change my shape from cube to maybe a 20-sided sphere. Wow. Okay, looks good. My birth, I want to change that to emit start 0, emit stop 0. And what we'll see is now I have spheres all over my geosphere in the amount of 200. The issue is that for what we want to do, we want to have exactly as many spheres as we have vertices for our geosphere. So what I'm going to do is I change this so that my spheres aren't all over my spheres that I created aren't on my geosphere. I'm going to right click on my geosphere and go to Object Properties. So what I did is I clicked on my geosphere to select it, right click, Object Properties, and what I want to do is I want to see how many vertices there are. There are 162 vertices in my geosphere, so I want 162 spheres. So emit, we can change that back to 0 in the amount, 162. I can also change my size in my shape. I have the ability to change the size, so let's change that to something like 2 sounds good. Let's see what happens there. Okay. What we see though is I have 162 spheres if I wanted to go around and count them all, but they're not at my vertices. So under my position objects, I can click on, instead of surface, I can choose vertices all. Now my spheres are at every vertex in my geosphere. What I want to do now is I'm actually going to copy this geosphere. I'm going to, an easy way is to go to Edit. I'm going to go to Clone. I'm going to make a copy of it, and I can name it whatever I want. We'll just say Geosphere 002. Okay. Now with Geosphere 002, what I'm going to do under Modify, I'm going to go to Particle Skinner, because I'm actually going to use these particles that I'm spawning to skin or control my geosphere. So Particle Skinner. And here, under particle flow systems, I want to add my particle flow. So we can either add it or I can go by list. And if I bring this over so you can see it, it actually shows that I have particle flow source. So I'll click that one, click OK. And then I'm going to say activate it. So activate the skinning. Now if I move my time, what I see is that my second sphere is actually being controlled by my particles. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the first sphere. I'm going to move it upwards, and what we'll see is the second sphere follows it because my particles are being spawned on my first sphere, my geosphere. If I do my timeline again, you can see they fall, collapse. That doesn't look too good. So I don't really need to see this geosphere anymore, or at least for right now. So I'm going to right click and hide selected, boop, hidden, but I can still see the second geosphere and I can see all the stuff that's going on with it. Right now it looks like a mess. So we'll go back into our particle view, and I don't need this spin at all. But what I am going to do is try to add something that will keep those spheres together a little bit more. And strangely enough, I'm going to use a thing called Impede Glue. I'm going to bring that in. Now let's see what happens. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit better. Let's go into our Impede Glue, and we have some options. Maybe let's turn our simplified to rigid. Let's see what happens with rigid. Okay, not really what we want. What if we do our timing to continuous instead of on event entry? Still not too good. So we'll change that back to simplified. We'll change this back to on entry event. What we do want to look at is our bind distance, which means that, and let's turn on our visualize binding. It means that the further apart these objects are, the less influence they'll have by the glue, unless we turn our bind distance up. So what we want to do, oh, well, that wasn't bad. Just a little bit there. You see the lower that I go, blue is showing the things that are bound, and the ones that aren't bound don't have that blue. So if I try my thing now, we've got some connected here, some connectivity. So let's bring that a little higher. Okay, we've got some that still aren't, but let's see what it looks like. A little bit better. Another thing that we can look at is our max binds per particle. And right now we're saying that the max we can have is 4 particles bound together. What if we turn that up to like 8? Now we see that we have a lot more particles that are binding to each other, which means now our object, our particles aren't really going all over the place. Our glue is working a little bit better. And now it looks like we have jello. Now it looks like we have jello going on there. And we can change that. One thing that influences how our object works is by the size of these spheres. So if we go back to shape and we change our size to be something bigger, like maybe 3, let's see how that affects it. Oh, we're a lot more rigid. Okay, what if we change that to 5? That's pretty big. Oh, then, okay. So we saw bigger. What if we look at smaller? What happens if we go smaller? Oh, okay, that's not working exactly how we want it to. Okay, so maybe we'll stay between 1.5 and 2. See what 1.5 does. All right, ooh, that looks pretty neat. So we're going to stick with that. Now, another awesome thing that we can do is just like we were doing in the last video where we have our deflectors our universal deflector and geometry, it will work the same way here. So I'm going to move this over, going to create a quick box, also create a deflector, a universal deflector, and I'm going to bind my deflector to my box. And is this going to work? Did I do this right? No, I did not. And the reason why is because there's one other thing that we have to add here. So under the geometry that we have, let's go to the Modify tab, and we're going to add a P-flow collision shape. Under World Space Modifier, P-flow collision shape. So we click on that, going to Geometry, it's on top of my box, and I'm going to activate it. So now if I move my object, let's give it a little time to activate. So what we see is that the sphere isn't colliding with our shape. The reason why is although we have a P-flow collision shape on the box, we're not telling our system that it's supposed to collide. So what we'll do is we'll go into our PS source, open our particle view, and here under Impede Glue, what I'm going to do is add an Impede collision. Our regular collision won't work because we're using our Impede particles or our mParticles. So I'm going to find Impede collision, and then here I'm going to drag it under my glue, click on my collision, and then it's asking what deflectors do you want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and choose by list, and let me bring my list over so we can see, and my box is listed. So I'm going to click on my box, click select. Then what I should see, let's move this over here a little bit, is that now my sphere moves with my collider. Or rather, my collider collides with my sphere, however you want to say it. Now again, we can change the way our shape moves, or the way our sphere moves, by manipulating the colliders that we're using, or the particles that we're using for collision. And there, I can go to my shape, because that's where I'm generating the shape for my particles. And let's have a size of 2, or maybe 3, so we can really see the difference. And then, if I scrub my timeline, we can see that I'm much less flat, or rather, I look more like a more rigid sphere. So what I'm going to say is play around with these items. Can we add other icons that will change things? What if we add speed, or what if we add something else? So feel free to play around with those. Feel free to change the size and add other manipulators and whatnot. And until then, I hope you have a lot of fun.